Picture this: October 1907. The most powerful men in America are sitting in a locked library in Manhattan. Outside, the nation is collapsing. Banks are failing. People are rioting in the streets. The stock market is in freefall. The government is powerless. And inside that library, one man is deciding who survives and who doesn't. One man is choosing which banks live and which banks die. One man is using his personal fortune to save the entire American economy. That man wasn't the president. He wasn't a government official. He wasn't elected by anyone. His name was John Pierpont Morgan. And for a brief moment in history, he had more power than the United States government itself. This is the story of how one banker became more powerful than presidents. How he controlled railroads, steel, electricity, and money itself. How he saved America from total collapse. And how his power became so terrifying that the government had to destroy him to survive. This isn't a story about banking. This is a story about power. Raw, absolute, unchecked power. And what happens when one man has too much of it. The boy who wasn't supposed to survive 1837, Hartford, Connecticut. A sickly child is born into one of America's wealthiest families. He has seizures, terrible skin conditions, chronic illness. Doctors don't think he'll survive to adulthood. His name is John Pierpont Morgan. And he will prove everyone wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Unlike Carnegie, who clawed his way up from poverty, Morgan was born into money. His grandfather was a founder of Aetna Insurance. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was one of the most powerful international bankers in the world, operating out of London. Young Pierpont, as he was called, grew up watching his father move money across oceans, finance governments, and make kings and presidents come to him for favors. He learned something that most people never understand. Money isn't just currency. Money is power. And whoever controls the money controls everything else. But there was a problem. Pierpont wasn't charming like his father. He was intimidating, brutal. His eyes were piercing and cold. A medical condition called rhinophthalmia caused his nose to become grotesquely enlarged and discolored, giving him a frightening appearance. People were scared of him, and Pierpont Morgan learned to use that fear like a weapon. The education of a titan while Carnegie was working 12-hour days in a textile factory. Young Morgan was studying mathematics in Switzerland and art history in Germany, while Rockefeller was selling produce. Morgan was learning high finance in London under his father's tutelage. By age 24, he was running the New York office of his father's banking empire. By 30, he was making deals that moved millions of dollars. By 40, he was the most feared banker in America. But what made Morgan different wasn't just his wealth or his connections, 'twas his philosophy. Morgan believed in consolidation. He believed competition was wasteful and destructive. He believed that industries should be controlled by a few powerful men who could run them efficiently and profitably. He believed in monopoly, not as a dirty word, but as the natural order of capitalism. And he had the money and the will to make it happen. The Morganization of America, 1885. America's railroads are a mess. Dozens of companies, overlapping routes, price wars, corruption, chaos. The railroad industry is bleeding money and going nowhere. Morgan saw an opportunity. He started buying railroads. It's not to run them competitively, but to merge them, consolidate them, control them. He would invite rival railroad executives to his office or onto his yacht, the Corsair. And he would make them an offer they couldn't refuse. Merge with his system or be destroyed by it. One famous story tells of two railroad presidents who refused to cooperate with Morgan's consolidation plan. Morgan invited them onto the Corsair. The yachts sailed out into the ocean. Morgan locked them in a room and wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to merge. They agreed. This became known as Morganization, the process of bringing chaos under control through consolidation and monopoly. through raw financial power and intimidation. By the late 1890s, Morgan controlled most of the major railroad lines in America. If you wanted to ship anything anywhere, you probably paid J.P. Morgan. But railroads were just the beginning. Buying Andrew Carnegie, remember that story about Carnegie selling his steel company for $480 million? The buyer was J.P. Morgan, 1900. Morgan decided he wanted to control the entire American steel industry. But there was a problem. Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie didn't want to sell. He'd built his empire from nothing. It was his life's work. Why would he give it up? Morgan needed leverage. So he started buying up Carnegie's competitors, merging them, building a coalition powerful enough to threaten Carnegie's dominance. Carnegie got the message. He could either sell to Morgan on Morgan's terms or face a destructive war that would hurt both of them. Charles Schwab, Carnegie's right-hand man, arranged a secret meeting. Morgan and Carnegie's representatives negotiated through the night. Carnegie scribbled his price on a piece of paper, $480 million. Morgan looked at the number, didn't negotiate, didn't counter, just said, "I accept." He then created United States Steel Corporation, the world's first billion-dollar company, the largest corporation ever created. And Morgan controlled it. Steel, railroads, what else? Everything else, the empire expands. Morgan didn't just control steel and railroads, he controlled money itself. He reorganized General Electric, consolidating the entire electrical industry. If you used electricity, you probably paid a Morgan company. He financed the creation of International Harvester, controlling agricultural equipment manufacturing. He controlled Western Union, the telegraph system that connected the nation. He had enormous influence over insurance companies, shipping lines, and dozens of other industries. But his real power came from banking. Morgan's Bank, J.P. Morgan and Company financed the government, financed other banks, financed entire industries. When you needed capital for anything significant in America, you came to Morgan. And Morgan decided if you got it or not. He decided if your business lived or died. He decided if you succeeded or failed. One man, unelected, unaccountable to anyone except himself, controlling the flow of capital through the entire American economy. Presidents came and went. Morgan remained. The panic that changed everything, October 1907. This is where our story began. The moment when Morgan's power became impossible to ignore. A financial panic started. Banks were failing. Stock prices were collapsing. People were running to banks to withdraw their money, causing more banks to fail. It was a death spiral. President Theodore Roosevelt was in office. Roosevelt, the trust buster, the man who hated monopolies and corporate power. And he was powerless to stop the panic. The United States government didn't have a central bank. It didn't have the tools to inject money into the system. It didn't have mechanisms to stop bank runs. It was helpless. So Roosevelt did something that reveals just how much power Morgan had. He asked Morgan for help. Morgan was 70 years old, should have been retired. Instead, he became a one-man Federal Reserve. He gathered the most powerful bankers in New York in his private library. He locked the doors, and he told them what was going to happen. Morgan personally examined the books of failing banks and trust companies. He decided which ones were worth saving and which should be allowed to fail. He forced healthy banks to pool their money to rescue the weak ones. He used his personal fortune to stabilize the stock market. There's a legendary moment from that week. A group of bank presidents were arguing about who should contribute to the rescue fund. Nobody wanted to be first. They argued for hours. Morgan, who had been sitting silently in another room, walked in. He was smoking a cigar. He didn't say a word. He just stared at them with those terrifying eyes. Within 5 minutes, they agreed. They signed the paper. The banks were saved. Morgan worked around the clock for weeks, making decisions, moving money, saving some companies and letting others die, using his judgment, his money, and his power to hold the entire American economy together. And it worked. The panic ended. The economy stabilized. Morgan had single-handedly prevented a complete economic collapse. He was a hero. Newspapers praised him. The government thanked him. He had saved America. But people started asking a very dangerous question. If one man could save the economy, didn't that mean one man controlled the economy? And if one man controlled the economy, was that man more powerful than the government itself? That question terrified a lot of people. And it led to Morgan's downfall. The investigation, 1912. Congress created the Peugeot Committee to investigate the money trust, to find out if a small group of bankers, led by J.P. Morgan, controlled American finance and industry. They subpoenaed Morgan, forced him to testify before Congress, and what came out shocked the nation. The committee discovered that Morgan and two other banks controlled 341 directorships in 112 corporations with combined resources of over $22 billion. In 1912 dollars, that's over $600 billion in today's money. Morgan personally held 72 directorships. He was on the board of railroads, steel companies, banks, insurance companies, shipping lines. His web of control touched every part of American economic life. But the most revealing moment came during Morgan's testimony. The committee lawyer asked him, "Is not commercial credit based primarily upon money or property?" Morgan responded with the most honest and terrifying statement of his career. "No, sir. The first thing is character. Before money or anything else, money cannot buy it." What did that mean? It meant Morgan believed credit should be based on whether he personally trusted you. Not on collateral, not on business plans. On whether Morgan thought you had good character, and who decided if you had good character? Morgan did. One man's personal judgment determined who got funding and who didn't, who succeeded and who failed. That was the system. The committee was horrified. The public was outraged. The idea that one man's personal opinion controlled the entire economy was un-American. It was antithetical to democracy. It was dangerous. Morgan didn't see it that way. He genuinely believed that he and men like him were better equipped to run the economy than the government or the free market. He believed his judgment was sound. His intentions were good. His control was necessary. He left the hearings exhausted and defeated. His health was failing. His reputation was in tatters. The hero of 1907 had become the villain of 1912. The death of a king, March 31st, 1913. J.P. Morgan died in Rome at age 75. The official cause was exhaustion and stress from the congressional investigation. When they opened his will, people expected him to be worth billions. After all, this was the man who controlled the entire American economy. His estate was worth about $80 million. Huge money, but nothing compared to Carnegie or Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller famously said upon hearing the amount, "And to think he wasn't even a rich man." What Rockefeller understood, what everyone realized, was that Morgan's power didn't come from personal wealth. It came from control. From being the man everyone had to go through. From being the gatekeeper of capital. Morgan didn't need to own everything. He just needed to control everything, and he did. The system that replaced him 3 months before Morgan died. December 1912, Congress was already working on legislation to ensure no one could ever have Morgan's power again. In December 1913, 9 months after Morgan's death, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Federal Reserve System, America's central bank. The system that Morgan had been personally during the Panic of 1907 was now institutionalized. But instead of one man making decisions, it would be a government institution, accountable, in theory, to the people. The age of Morgan was over. The age of institutional control had begun. But here's the twist that Morgan would have appreciated. The Federal Reserve was largely designed by bankers. Bankers who had learned from Morgan. Bankers who shared his philosophy. The system changed, but the control that remained with the banks. It's just more of them, more distributed, more hidden. Less obvious than one man with terrifying eyes sitting in a locked library deciding who lives and who dies. The question that never goes away, so here's what we have to wrestle with. Was J.P. Morgan a hero or a villain? He saved the American economy in 1907 when the government couldn't. He created efficiencies through consolidation that benefited consumers and industries. He believed in his vision of organized capitalism and made it work. But he also destroyed competition. He controlled industries through monopoly and intimidation. He decided winners and losers based on personal preference. He wielded power that no unelected person in a democracy should ever have. He built an empire not of things, but of control. And when he died, that control had to be broken up because it was too dangerous for democracy to tolerate. The Pujo Committee found that Morgan's concentration of power was harmful to American democracy and free markets. They weren't wrong. One man shouldn't have that much power. But during the Panic of 1907, that one man with that much power was the only thing standing between America and total economic collapse. The government couldn't do it. The free market couldn't do it. Only Morgan could. The legacy we're still living with. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The questions raised by J.P. Morgan's power are just as relevant today as they were in 1912. We replaced one J.P. Morgan with a system, the Federal Reserve. Too big to fail banks, massive investment firms, private equity, hedge funds. We didn't eliminate concentrated financial power, we just made it more complicated, less personal, harder to see. When the economy crashed in 2008, who saved it? The government bailed out the banks, but who decided which banks to save? Who decided how to structure the bailouts? Financial experts? Bankers? The people who created the problem in the first place. Sound familiar? Morgan believed that finance was too complicated for common people or politicians to understand. That experts needed to be in control. That concentration of power in the hands of competent men was better than democratic chaos. That philosophy didn't die with Morgan. It evolved. It's alive and well today in different forms. The same debates rage on. Should we break up big banks? Are they too big to fail? Do they have too much power? Can democracy survive when financial power is concentrated in so few hands? Morgan didn't invent these questions, but he embodied them in a way that was impossible to ignore. The man behind the power. One last thing. Who was J.P. Morgan as a person? He collected art obsessively. His collection became the core of the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, one of the greatest cultural institutions in the world. He had a terrible temper. He would destroy business rivals without mercy, then donate millions to churches and museums. He was utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He genuinely believed he was serving America by controlling its economy. He saw himself as a stabilizing force, a necessary authority in a chaotic world. He was also lonely. His physical appearance isolated him. People were afraid of him. He had few real friends. In his final years, he spent more time with his art collection than with people, surrounded by beautiful things he'd bought but couldn't take with him. When he died, the stock market closed. Flags flew at half-mast. He was honored as an American titan. But the very next year, the government started dismantling the system that gave him power. Because even in death, he was too dangerous to let his legacy continue. The unanswerable question: was America better off with J.P. Morgan? Would the economy have collapsed without him in 1907? Would someone worse have filled the vacuum if he hadn't consolidated power? Or was his very existence proof that the system was broken? That any system allowing one man that much power needed to be torn down and rebuilt? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're real. They matter. It's because we're still living in the world that Morgan shaped. The The Federal Reserve he inadvertently created still controls monetary policy. The consolidated industries he built still dominate their markets. The philosophy that experts should control finance still drives policy. And somewhere in the shadows of our modern economy, there might be someone with Morgan-level power that we just can't see yet. Someone moving money across the world, making decisions that affect millions. Unelected, unaccountable. We like to think we learned from the age of Morgan, that we created systems to prevent that concentration of power. But power doesn't disappear. It just changes form. JP. Morgan controlled America's entire economy because the system allowed one person to have that much power. We changed the system. But did we really change the power structure? Or did we just make it harder to see? That's the question Morgan's ghost still asks us. And we still don't have a good answer.